And of course, concluding remarks means that I will say something, 5 minutes. Don't be afraid. Anyway, it will not be a lecture at all. And also, don't forget that, wow, I am speaking in English. I have not spoken a word of English in the last 5 years. Last year in 2018, there was in Paris an event, after all. I don't remember the place, Karen. It was in Alcon, in the grand amphitheater of the Inalco. And the film was shown, and around the table, Karen was there, Krikor was there, but Anaïda Minassian was sitting next to me, and I was supposed to control her, but to make her speak. And that was one of the most, maybe, I don't know, beautiful moments. She died a few months ago. That was her last public appearance. And I knew that she had known Vaillor Chagan very well in the 6 years when Vaillor Chagan lived in Paris between 46 and 52. By the way, I will ask you later, did he have in these 6 years in Paris any contact with Nigros Sarafian? You will tell me later. Then, what I wanted to say here is first, the following, to do a summary of the events in Lisbon yesterday and today. Yesterday we had a panel at the MLA conference with 3 important and I think beautiful presentations. The first one was by Nanoj Kobranian about Jacopo Chagan, with a beautiful introduction on the fact that these voices, because the general title of the conference was Forgotten Voices, these voices are not forgotten, they have never been heard, and it was the first time that in an, let's say, international conference, true in an American context, because it is an American context, colonialist context, of course, but American anyway. It was the first time that there was a conversation between, or a place where some poetry, some literary production, some intellectual activity in the Armenian diaspora could be presented in a larger context, and the conversation was possible, let's say, with literature at large. And Nanor explained that very well, and I'm very, very thankful to her, I must say. Number one. Number two, we had a lecture by Karen on something that you didn't hear in the film, of course, because it was a secret activity of Vaillor Chagan in the last 15 years of his life. Okay, and this will introduce what I will say after. Next point, Vaillor Chagan is the revolutionary poet of the diaspora. I repeat the sentence, he's the revolutionary poet of the diaspora. Every word counts, because he's the only one. And he understood his activity as precisely, or didn't understand maybe himself his activity as a revolutionary in poetry, not outside poetry. And he destroys everything that we know about the poetic language in the Armenian language, and so on. Okay, but he also, you heard that, the author of two books of short stories. And the first thing he published in 1944 was a short story in Musapesh, which has not been, someone should gather everything in a book, because this Birader is not available to readers. Okay, but he also wrote novels and never dared to publish the novels that he wrote. Then I have read at least two of them, and there is the entirely, how should I say, unknown to the public, this great novel called Hervantan, which you could translate promontory? Yeah. Hervantan, where he wants to rewrite the novel left unfinished by his father, the remnants, Manatzortats, and then he was rivaling, do you say that in English, with his father, in some way finishing the work that he had not the time or the possibility to finish, because the Remnants is an unfinished novel, without asking himself how and why Remnants remained unfinished. Placing himself in exactly the same locations, Brusa and so on. It's an extraordinary instance of a strange, conflictual and deadly conflictual relationship between the father and son. And I will come back to this. And then we had by our friend Gulbenkian this lecture, which was a parallel reading between Nigor Serafian and Hagop Porsche and Gayoshagan. Why? Because for those who don't know, just a word about Nigor Serafian. Nigor Serafian was Paris, member of this Paris School of Writers. The preferred and also the most hated, because it works together, student of Hagop Shagan, who himself, you didn't speak about that, I think of that now, who himself had a relationship of hatred and love, adoration with his father, Hagop Shagan, I mean his father, spiritual and so on. It's a terrible relationship between them that we see in the letters. Hagop Shagan never recognized the Paris writers as his successors, sons, daughters, and so on. Never! And they needed to be recognized by him. Wow! What a tragedy for the sons not to be recognized as sons by their father. Huh? Wow! And that's why it was interesting to compare, to read together the two sons of Hagop Shagan, the one by the blood, the other one by the spirit. Okay, and now, the last thing. What characterizes the diaspora, you all know, is the fact that each generation has to create itself, recreate itself from scratch. There is no, in the diaspora, institution for the transmission of anything, thought, thinking. No one expects anything from you when you are born. Which means that you have to create yourself. There is, very simply, the diaspora is a quintessential place where there is no transmission. That's what dispersion means, that's what diaspora means. No transmission. The only example of, precisely in the diaspora, of father-son, but it could have been mother-daughter or father-daughter, but here it's more psychoanalytical. It's father-son. Example is this relationship between Hagopochagan and Vahe, the son by the blood, who both of them are the two probably most, let's exaggerate 1 second, writers of the diaspora, one as a novelist, the other one as a poet. But again, I repeat, it's not an exemplary case, it's the exceptional case where the transmission, I repeat, by the blood and by the spirit, it's not clear. The transmission is both effective and impossible. And it's as though Vahe had experienced in his own flesh this necessity and this impossibility which characterizes the diaspora. That's extraordinary, I must say. And that's why the work that Karen is doing on this unpublished and unpublishable, probably, novel, The Promontory, that Vahe never in his lifetime thought that it would be published. But he was writing it. And then I do not know at all what Karen is going to do with that novel. It's at each time that I'm listening to him, it seems to me contradictory, paradoxical, impossible, interesting, non-interesting, everything at the same time. And then here we are with Vahe, a writer who I'm also almost finished. 1 second. I have to add something. I have to make the connection, and now the connection is not being made in my mind. I don't understand why. Wow. In 1946, I'm going now to say a few words about the father, Hagop. In 1946, at the time of the repatriation, at the time of this incredible propaganda in the diaspora in order to destroy the diaspora, which was exactly the meaning and the aim of the movement of repatriation, there was a campaign of defamation against Hagopochagan. It lasted for 2 years, between 45, 47, 48, 33 years. Hagopochagan, articles in journals, really a conscious, systematic enterprise of destroying the figure of Hagop Shagan among whom? Among those who understood Armenian, because everything was in Armenian here in this campaign it came from Armenia. Then among those for whom Hagop Shagan was, what he was the consciousness and the conscience, both at the same time, of the diaspora, at least of the Armenian-speaking diaspora. In Armenian, Khirj, you have Kidatsuchu, both at the same time. And they knew very well in Armenia that Hagop Shagan was the consciousness and the conscience of the diaspora for everyone. That's why they wanted to destroy him, his reputation. And they succeeded. The repatriation was a success, which means so many people died and were deported to Siberia. And Hagop Shagan, he was devastated. He wrote an answer. It's called Badaskhana, which is unpublished. It's the last thing that Vahe gave to me. He gave me the manuscript of Badaskhana. It's remained unpublished. It's interesting. And that's now my conclusion. Vahe Shagan also, in a different way, was the conscience of the diaspora. That the way he worked, at least, for himself. That's why he is not only a poet, he's not only a writer of prose, a novelist, and so on. He was the intellectual of the diaspora. He was writing constantly in the Armenian newspapers about everything. But probably all books that have been published in Armenian diaspora have been reviewed by Vahe in one or the other of his different chronicles and so on and so on. But also, I will finish with a personal note, if you allow me. Vahe Shagan was the most beautiful personality that I have ever known in my life, as a man, and the most generous. And also, he is the only one, I had said that a few days ago, he was the only one who ever expected something from me, and did that, said it explicitly. It was in 1778, he wrote me a letter asking me to write about his father, Hagop Shagan, because he was preparing a special issue of the review Ararat that was to be published 5 years later. Then he was already planning the special issue 5 years before. And I had never read Menatzortats. And then I spent my life. The year after, I spent 3, 4, 5 months reading Menatzortats, of course, because at that time Menatzortats, it's 2,000 pages, but in the edition of 1933, it's unreadable. I'll explain after why it wasn't readable, it would be too long. Then it lasted 4 months, 5 months to read the novel, 1 page a day, or something like that. And then I have spent my life reading Hagop Shagan because of that letter. He has been the only one who has asked me something, which means to expected something from me. And as I told you, that precisely the diaspora is a place where no one is expecting anything from you. Thank you very, very much.
We'll take questions for Professor Nichanian.
Yeah. There are questions, wow.
Just wanted to know when we can read Badashan.
I know, but that's
I understand that it's not published.
We have to publish that in the very near future. It's time. It's time. But that's interesting also. It's new that we, writers and intellectuals of the diaspora, that we have working and real relationship with people in Armenia. It has been now more than 10 years, maybe between 10 and 15 years that I lecture very frequently in Armenia and so on, and there is a real exchange. That's new, that's entirely new. And then today probably it's possible, because we didn't publish books in Armenia before, so now I don't know why we began to publish books in Armenia.
Also, Mnatortatis, in Armenia still is unpublished.
No, tell me again.
Mnatortatis of Jacob also still is not published in Armenia.
Yeah, but that's another problem, and it's a problem. This question of the circulation of books. That's a problem of the circulation of books. Mnatortatis has been published twice. One in 1933-34, first as how would you say terton serial, and then as 3 volumes. And then republished by Boss Nabian in 83, 84, something like that. Yeah, and then, but the problem is that the books do not circulate. But in order for the book to circulate, probably in Armenia, is that the name has to be heard, other than negatively. Hagopashagan in the period of the Soviet Armenia Hagopashagan was the enemy. Tashnak Sagan and so on, although he was not Tashnak Sagan, but and so on, diaspora. It was the enemy. No one has ever read, you expect that from Armenia at least some people have read Mnatortatis. No one, not a single citizen of Armenia has ever read Mnatortatis. That's a problem of the Armenian people. He is the greatest writer of the 20th century. Tout genre confondu, I would say in French.
Another question. What kept you from publishing Badashan for 40 or 41 or 42 years?
Yeah, because two things. The first is that, related to what I said now, is that I would have published that in GAM, and GAM has a very strange temporality, let's say, because when one day I realized that my readers were not in the diaspora, they were in Armenia. That was the trauma of my life. And the last issue of GAM that I published was in 2005, and then since 2005 I have not published an issue of GAM. Now it's time. Now maybe I will. Okay, well, okay. Then the second reason is that I can say this publicly is that none will ask a question, but is that that day probably it was my last visit in Philadelphia to IANU, and we were with Hrant Markarian, who is a writer and playwright, let's say, who lives in New York, and he gave a copy to me, and the copy to grant. And my copy has the last 2 pages missing, and I don't know where they are, these 2 pages. And then you have to answer. Right. Yeah. Nano.
Well, I guess it's more of a clarifying question, which comes down to the statement you made about in the diaspora, no one expects anything of you. And I just feel like that might be true, but it might be localized in various ways. Because I was born in Lebanon and educated until the age of 9 in Armenian schools, and then educated until the age of 13 in an Armenian school in the US. And the overwhelming sentiment was that everyone expects everything of you. A superhuman expectation that no actual human being can ever actually achieve. Which leaves you in a state of paralysis most of the time. And then the question of transmission, Boledian says something very different. It's not so much that there's no transmission. Boledian's point, and I think I tend to agree more with his point, is that the content of the transmission is warped and sometimes perverse. So the content of the transmission seems to be out of step with the time, almost, or that it isn't subjected to a sort of critical analysis or embellishment or just organicness, if you like. And I was wondering then, because I also spoke with another scholar in Germany, an Armenian, Diyarbakir Armenian man actually, of your generation, who likewise was lamenting the fact that there's nothing in the diaspora. There's no funding in the diaspora. There's no institution in the diaspora where we can actually meet and converse. And I'm just finding this increasingly strange and difficult to accept because I've received transmission. I know that I have transmitted. And I think the disconnect isn't a question of the facility to transmit. It's that there are certain sort of unspeakable phenomena taking place that have to do with the politicization of the field and a kind of segmentation and a certain sort of cliquiness and a certain sort of backdoor politics that really intensely affects how that transmission occurs, whether it actually takes place, with whom it actually takes place, and whether it actually can sow seeds that can grow. So a lot of sort of internal political issues rather than a question of institutional or financial availability.
I will add just one thing as indirect answer. In 1984, maybe, there was this meeting of the Zorian Institute, which had a title invented by Libaridian himself, and the title was "What is to be asked?" And it was Tarakartsik, how would you say that in English? It was...
Turn of the century?
No.
Turning point. Switching secular switching.
Turning point.
Huh?
That turns the century.
No.
Turning point.
Okay. The few intellectuals were gathered together. Hachik was among them, Libaridian, Dagiskortian, and they had the type of discussion that we have here. And this was one of the points made by you, Hachik, or more by Garbis Kortian, this idea that precisely thinking needs institutionalization. You don't think alone in your own space and so on. And Zorian wanted precisely to create that type of institutionalization that would make possible a thinking of the diaspora in the diaspora